Forgive me guys, late video is months late, imagine that. But to preface this entire thing, the answer is so very special to me. In fact, my first reaction to Atlus announcing P5 Royal, P4 Golden, and P3 Portable ports for all platforms way back in 2022, besides the obvious hype, was my disappointment that Persona 3 Fez wasn't getting the port because Persona 3 Portable doesn't contain the answer. Now fast forwarding to over 2 years later, and episode Aigis does give us that epilogue on modern platforms. But was this really the answer we were hoping and waiting for? So before I really dive into the seemingly small on the surface but actually massive changes, I do want to give credit where it's due and briefly talk about the newfound playability I'm really grateful for, and also thank Atlus for the review code to this DLC. So in general, gameplay-wise, episode Aigis is a great modernization. See, something that always bothered me about this epilogue portion of Fez was how basically 90% of the game was a dungeon crawler, the remaining 10% being the actual story. It felt off when a great deal of the appeal of the new look entry to the series at the time in Persona 3 was the balance between combat gameplay and social sim gameplay. And I'm pretty sure the answer, having none of the latter, just didn't sit right with many players who otherwise enjoyed the main campaign part of Persona 3. So it wasn't all that uncommon to hear people give up halfway through this epilogue entirely, and sadly miss out on some great closure to Persona 3. Episode Aigis, though? Thank goodness for all the new ways to speed up combat and exploration, but especially access to the Persona Compendium. That was definitely one of the most common complaints of the original answer, especially one of mine, since out of anything, there really was no good reason, gameplay-wise or lore-wise, not to have access to it. But okay, as much as I ragged on the original for all of its dungeon crawling, I'm really not a fan of episode Aigis adding dorm activities. And I'm clearly not the only person who found these completely immersion-breaking, given how badly some of C's want to find a way out and be done with this ordeal ASAP. So seriously? We're supposed to learn the importance of taking a break every now and then. Didn't they already learn that during the final month leading up to the Nyx fight? Like, sure. Is this pretty solid advice for life in general? Yes, but there's a time and place for everything, and these hangouts do not fit the context of the answer. Surely there must have been some other way to return these characters' gameplay characteristics, right? They already did it with their theurgies, just have them unlock automatically after certain bosses. So the most immersion-breaking one of these was Yukari's second hangout. I was so frustrated when I saw this, knowing the direction episode Aigis should take if it was truly following the answer's lead. See, Yukari's friendliness to Aigis here is so out of place and completely alters her intended characterization. She's supposed to be jealous of her, for understandable reasons I'll get to. So what do you mean, take a break right now? And with Aigis of all people. This irks me because part of what made Yukari so compelling in the answer was her trying so hard to rush the grieving process, consistently saying things like,
"Finally. Geez, I'm glad this didn't end up taking another year."
And then there's the removal of any overt antagonism. Like how there's no longer any animation where Yukari tries to take the true key by force after she's already lost. And I have much more to say on this in one of the later sections. But yeah, all these changes diminish Yukari's foil and mirror relationship to Aigis. Sad, given how this epilogue drives home how they were the two who socially withdrew the most from everyone after the protag's death. Though the actual execution of this concept is unfortunately worse than lackluster in this remake. I can't believe they even removed in its entirety one of my favorite group scenes in the entire Persona series. I'm referring to this automatic follow-up yelling match right after the infamous group discussion, which is playing on screen right now. So without further ado, let's dissect how episode Aigis shifted things and why I believe it's a less compelling exploration of grief than the original answer, particularly regarding these two concepts. Firstly, how we're not always going to get along with our friends, and secondly, how personal growth is not always going to be an upwards trajectory. Though something I can guarantee is a great deal on my favorite graphic tees from my fave graphic tees brand, and also the sponsor of today's video, Into the AM. The shirt I've been wearing, it's actually one of theirs. Meanwhile, this green one I've owned for over a year now has held up fantastically. I love how nearly all of them are 100% cotton, and I can confidently say they are the comfiest tees I own. All the designs are so cool, though I especially love the Asian-themed designs, from the more traditional landscapes to the ones with more modern flair. There's a site-wide sale going on right now to April 4th, up to 60% off on graphic tees, basic tees, and so much more. And on top of that, you can save an additional 10% off your order using my discount code LadyV, which you can find down in the description and pinned comment. I really am a fan of Into the AM, and by supporting them, you're also supporting me and the channel. So thanks guys, and big thanks to them for sponsoring this video. Now back to the episode Aigis analysis. Okay, so interestingly enough, I truly didn't have a problem with Reload's changes to Yukari, Junpei, and Akihiko in the journey portion of the remake's narrative. The shifts in characterization took some warming up to, sure, but I soon grew to love these changes in demeanor from their English Fez versions in their own little ways. Emphasis on the English localization. I dissected those differences in greater detail in my Persona 3 Reload analysis from last year, and do recommend watching that for full context at some point, but otherwise I'll do my best to reiterate the most relevant points in this video. With that said, my main point here is that though these alterations shifted some things tonally, ultimately nothing affected the overall character growth and roles in the story, nor the general narrative or themes of Persona 3 Reload's main campaign. However, I sadly can't say the same for episode Aigis. The changes to all of Caesar's dialogue and the prose of it all in general has irrevocably changed everything for the worse. Please don't get me wrong though, I still would rather us get episode Aigis than not have this epilogue to Persona 3 Reload at all, and I still think this DLC does a good job portraying just how important a support system is after profound loss. But can I consider this a fantastic portrayal of the grieving process anymore? Honestly, not really. And okay, it's about time I admit my intense personal bias and the main reason for the title of this video too. They utterly messed up my favorite character in the entire Persona series. Yes, my fave. As you can hopefully tell, judging by my commissioned banner art, please check out Masky's work with the links down below, by the way. Also, the only Persona 3 character I made an individual video on all those years ago. I meant to get to everybody else eventually, but that unfortunately didn't happen at the time. But anyway, my point is I can't forgive this. What the hell did they do to Junpei? We will get into the specifics, But first, I need to set the stage and talk about episode Aigis' dialogue as a whole. So, the thing that really struck me was how clinical it all sounded. I'm referring to these kinds of lines that Yukari and Akihiko throw around.
Now everyone needs to recognize their own feelings.
We need to recognize our feelings. Sounds like you still don't.
I'm reminded of this whole therapy speak seeping into the average layperson's language issue that's become a more and more prevalent topic in society, it seems. And I can't help but view episode Aigis as a good example of the negative impact of this in action. You see, while it's great that more and more people are seeking out and utilizing therapy, it's not so great that everyone and their mom is starting to sound exactly like this. Especially for instances where individual honesty would be better suited than, for lack of a better descriptor, PR-sounding phrasing. Seriously, guys, the "we all need to recognize our feelings" talk sounds so unnaturally devoid of character in episode Aigis. And okay, I'm not trying to paint the picture that all of therapy and therapists sound like this, but what I am getting at is that the way these lessons or takeaways are worded in episode Aigis sound like how you'd refer to these events after the fact. Like, after it's been a while and you've had more time to collect your thoughts. Not less than a month after the sudden death just happened. These changes to the dialogue mean we lose the truly organic and raw exploration of Caesar's feelings, how messy real-life communication can get at times, and what we're left with is a bunch of teenagers all speaking in the same clinical and dispassionate way to each other compared to the OG The Answer. Like, look at how on the nose Mitsuru's comfort to Yukari sounds. Though out of all of this, Akihiko takes the cake. All these dialogue changes particularly highlight how much Reload shifted his demeanor. Back in my P3 Reload analysis, I examined how the remake leaned into the fatherly aspects of the Emperor Arcana this time around. Something especially reflected in Aki's new Link episodes and dorm activities. But fast forward to episode Aigis, and well, this is not it, guys. He goes from sticking to just his own personal reasons for moving on in The Answer to some brand new lines where he's straight up lecturing Yukari. The people you've met, what you've gone through with them, it'd all be gone and you wouldn't be the person you are now. I'm not against young people being this emotionally mature to live by this kind of mentality, but this is more of an exception than the rule given how children's brains are still developing up to our mid-20s in reality, and I definitely don't think a teen is going to organically just say something along these lines. And for better or for worse, not everyone has the coping mechanisms to deal with loss in a healthy way, and that's okay. We all grow, mature, and/or express our feelings in different ways. So I kinda hate how episode Aigis utterly removed any and all tension or antagonism among the group. There's no messy infighting anymore. And in doing that, they've really discredited the different ways people grieve. Just straight up removed anyone who might be more relatable to players prone to anger when under sheer emotional distress. We just don't get the same building escalation until we have people actually shouting at each other like Yukari versus Akihiko, Yukari versus Junpei, which in turn really sold the fact we are actually fighting in the resulting Coliseo Purgatorio part. Like, looking back on all the Persona games, including Persona 1 and 2, we don't ever get a situation where the entire party splits up to this extent, you know? Episode Aigis just makes these stakes and fights feel meh. Definitely not as intense or meaningful. I mean, I'm clearly not the only one who found issue with the opening cutscene. It just looks like some normal sparring with your buddies to prepare for a typical huge shadow/monster fight. Not that you're actually fighting your homies because you're split on what to do with potentially world-ending consequences. Episode Aigis toning everything down brings me to how, in making Akihiko the main voice of reason in the group, it ended up stripping Junpei of everything amazing, such as right here. You guys need to calm down so we can actually make a decision together. Back when I first saw this in the answer, it was just incredible because it was as if Junpei was doing his best to respect his bro's memory via stepping up and taking leadership as best he can, regardless of what you may think about the P3 protag's supposed leadership or his relationship with Junpei. Please humor me, even if it wasn't exactly well-earned. Junpei is sold as the closest bro to the Persona 3 protagonist. But back to how Junpei is completely unrecognizable. Back in the OG answer, he claimed he's not as hardlined as Akihiko about returning to the past, but get this. Still made it absolutely clear that he doesn't think risking the Nyx fight again is worth it. All of this really sold how much he actually took everything he learned over the year to heart. It was a huge contrast and growth showcase from his much more selfish personality early on in Persona 3 Fez to someone who is actually thinking beyond himself and about everyone's well-being. But sadly, his dialogue in episode Aigis is completely vague. No specifics about what not being able to achieve a better future actually means. In fact, now he sounds kinda confused and unsure about everything, saying things like, "Oh man, the protag would have known what to do in this position." Like, dude, what? More so than ever, Reload is hyping you up as the best bro. You should know exactly what he was getting into. You should know how to carry on his memory and legacy. I can't overstate how sad it makes me to see the assured Junpei in Fez's epilogue gone. Completely. Which also showcased his growth from a very self-conscious and low self-esteem person deep down to someone who actually has more confidence in themselves. Now, to briefly return to Akihiko, in general, I feel they didn't distinguish enough between his and Junpei's decisions in episode Aigis. Back in the answer, Akihiko's reason was focused more deliberately about respecting the individual's choice. He wants everyone to respect the protags a la his "he knew what he was doing" line. And knowing Akihiko's story and the journey, it's clear he thinks of this concept as also respecting Shinji's agency, sacrifice, and respective choice. So getting back to Junpei, his stance in the OG answer does overlap with Akihiko's about respecting the protag's decision, yes, though ultimately the difference between them is that Junpei's main reasoning aligns more with how it's a bad idea for the entire world's sake to risk failing in a redo Nyx fight. Now, to be fair, as I explored in the P3 Reload video, Junpei was already characterized as someone more thoughtful about others early on in the remake. Stuff like his worries about apathy syndrome and its effects on people early on was something that absolutely didn't exist in Fez. So it is true that it's not like it would have been as big of a contrast and growth showcase for episode Aigis to include this reasoning like it was from Fez to the answer. Though honestly, it's still a huge disappointment to me since there's also nothing inherently different in Junpei's Reload characterization that wouldn't have fit his demeanor in the answer. He could have easily occupied the same general role that he did, but instead, episode Aigis stripped his character of any wisdom and maturity and handed it all over to Akihiko instead. And don't get me wrong, I love Akihiko myself. Don't even get me started on one of the biggest damn shames and how there's absolutely no mention of Chidori's death. That was such a core part of Junpei's journey, and it's insane to me that this line was straight up removed. I guess it's the devs assuming most players saved Chidori, so she's technically alive? But even then, she's lost all of her memories of her existential journey. She's a completely different person now, and is like how Aigis would have ended up at the end of this very DLC if her synaptic circuits truly were fried as Fuka feared. This brings me to another segment from my P3 reload analysis, the fact that every single SEAS member made an individual promise with the protag in the final rank of their link episode or social link, something that wasn't a thing for everyone in OG Persona 3. I wondered how this reload edition might affect the Answer's story. Like, I genuinely thought it'd be cool to see everyone show more blatant emotion over the MC's death, but oh man, not like this, guys. Not like this. Not at the expense of characters like Junpei's personal ties to other incredibly important people in their lives. And so, it's like the reload changes to Akihiko shine through to their natural conclusion here. The team dad and or fatherly figure of SEAS where only he gets to be the mature enough one and directly reference how someone's death affected him for the better. Junpei isn't allowed to reference anyone, I guess. By the way, this change to Junpei not only affects him, but also drastically affects Koromaru's symbolism for the worse as the one who chooses to side with Junpei. You see, Koro has always symbolically been pushed as the most emotionally/psychologically mature member of SEAS. I've explained this before in my numerous other Persona 3 videos, but the reason he has no second-tier persona is to indicate he has already done his growing. And Reload only added to the symbolism since Koro is the only one who already starts with 2 theurgies, while everyone else in SEAS acquires their second one to coincide with their personal growth in the story. Now, unfortunately, episode Aigis makes Koro's decision feel like, welp, just because. Because they dumbed down Junpei so much. Because he's so vague and unclear, the resulting pair of him and Koro feels way more like an obvious developer thought of, well, everyone else has a partner and we want everyone to be in a duo, so we'll just put Koro and Junpei together because they're the only pair left. So my point is that Koro's teaming up with Junpei doesn't feel purposeful or intentional anymore in the lore. That the reason he actively wants to side with Junpei is because they are coming at it from the same level-headed angle. It's irresponsible of us to risk the entire world's safety, even if it means going back to see the protag one last time. But okay, so we have Akihiko and Junpei covered. Now onto the final majorly changed character of episode Aigis, Yukari Takeba. The various changes here diminish all the cathartic and earned heartfelt moments between Yukari and Mitsuru, but especially Yukari and Aigis. You see, when I first saw Yukari blow up/lash out at Aigis and the other SEAS members back when I first played Fez the summer of 2013, it reminded me of a moment I really regretted the December before. A good friend of mine kept prodding me about why I didn't come to the annual trombone ice skating party that weekend. And that weekend for me had already been a rough one, and I was so angry in that moment, I just blew up at him. Of course I can't fucking come. My mom is terminally ill and bedridden, and I have to take care of her on the weekends. Yes, I was stressed, But also, my friend didn't deserve that. He didn't know. At the time, I had only opened up about the severity of my mom's condition with my basketball team, since it's the reason I quit that year, and my group of 5 closest girlfriends. So a couple days later, I apologized, and thankfully it proved so easy to make up, and we remained friends for many years after that. All this to say, I got Yukari in the answer. I could really identify with that rage. I truly appreciated seeing such an organic part of processing grief, as well as the commentary on relationships surviving tough times. I think this is such an important message nowadays because I can't help but notice this prevailing friendship and the loneliness epidemic topic that keeps popping up more and more in recent years. And actually, if I can bring back the proliferation of therapy speak point from earlier in the video, I feel like people nowadays are way too quick to cut off their closest friends for the smallest slight. No, this is not me trying to say you always need to forgive and keep blatantly abusive people around, or those who don't align with your values. Like, there definitely are toxic friendships, and/or you have to consider your own individual energy limitations and what you're willing to live with, and so on. But we also should be willing to extend grace to the people who have been our good faith friends for a long time. So in regards to Yukari and Aigis, not only have they gone through a lot together, but these are extenuating circumstances for sure. So I find it a damn shame that episode Aigis altered one of the most memorable scenes from the OG answer, when Yukari physically tries to yank the key from Aigis' hands before collapsing to the ground. In the remake, they just fast forward to the ladder, removing all the tension between the two, which I think sends a bad message that this fight wasn't that big or serious at all. Something that ultimately does a huge disservice to Yukari's genuine apology shortly afterwards. People aren't perfect, and it does feel like because people on social media tend to curate only the positive moments of their lives, many people viewing it develop this warped idea of what perfect friendships supposedly look like, conditioned us to believe things like, if I don't have a perfect friendship, I'm much better without any at all. Even though the reality is there are gonna be things that irk us about our friends, and we're not always gonna agree on everything. True perfection doesn't exist. But yeah, my point here is as long as there's genuine good faith and demonstrated willingness to change, we should be able to forgive each other. And Yukari extending that offer to be roommates at the end felt like such a huge ask on her part because both she and Aigis were singled out as the ones who withdrew from the rest of C's in grief. So I can't overstate how episode Aigis adding in these dorm hangouts where both of them are chilling no problem with the others and even each other totally killed their great foil and mirror dynamic in this epilogue. Even though this DLC still tries to mention it, I just can't buy it. Okay, something I do want to briefly touch on. If the devs were trying to course correct in episode Aigis and avoid playing into the emotional bitchy woman stereotype, then it's still possible to make Yukari confrontational without making her outright cruel. I do get that Yukari's characterization, when contrasted with Junpei's and Akihiko's, can appear like it's playing into the age-old false women equal emotional, while men equal rational dichotomy. Like maybe this is why they changed up episode Aigis Junpei so much too, so it's not like all the dudes sound super level-headed. I can kinda buy that argument, but ultimately, who knows? We'll never know. I just think it's sad the changes ended up so drastic since it's possible to walk and chew gum at the same time. They could have still kept Junpei's main reasoning while still keeping him more light-hearted, a la Reload demeanor versus his 2000s counterpart, as well as keep Yukari's antagonism, just toning down the cruelty. And going off that, it's a shame this remake just limits the variety of real emotion we can expect to see when people are grieving. A big part of bereavement, well, maybe not for everyone, but for many people, is anger. And episode Aigis avoided it entirely. I missed that same sense of seething rage over life's cruel circumstances that the answer's tension and raw in-party fighting captured so well. And it's not like Yukari's boiling over reaction didn't make sense given her personal past trauma. Her childhood growing up was all about what she endured in her late dad's memory, all on her own, keeping it bottled up to herself until it just bursts out. In other words, it's not surprising that she goes back to old habits die hard in this situation. I think it's important for the many people who've suffered long-lasting trauma to see examples of characters who aren't always making linear or upwards progress. That it's just as common and natural to regress as it is to showcase unexpected resilience a la OG Answer Junpei. And I can honestly relate to both. I've been privileged in many ways in life, but I've also had a lot of shit happen to me starting from a young age. Oftentimes, I have approached horrible circumstances outside my control with a growth mentality and attitude of gratitude, focusing on the little things I can still enjoy and control. Help, please forgive me for tooting my own horn for a sec, but I've often been described as wise beyond my years by people much older than me when it comes to this kind of adversity, specifically coping with major loss like death in the family or adverse health outcomes. I've been asked to and have given motivational talks on these kinds of topics when I was still in my late teens and very young adult years. And yet, last year marked 9 years since my paralyzing neurological condition and I just broke. Finally feeling this sheer anger at never feeling well despite everything I've done to take care of my health. It was the worst year ever for me mentally, and I, for all intents and purposes, absolutely regressed. So yes, progress is not linear, and the original answer captured that in such a beautifully unfiltered way. I wanted to love this updated epilogue, but I can't really bring myself to. Though again, I am in the camp of I'd rather have this episode Aigis epilogue on modern platforms out than not have it at all. But what did you think of these changes? Are there changes in the characters I didn't focus on that bothered you? Or did you like episode Aigis? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please like and or subscribe if you like this. And finally, I want to thank all my patrons and channel members for making these videos possible, especially my special Fusion supporters, Big Clingy, Sam Bezjak, and Meownalin, Malcolm Lowry, Peter Shepard, Andy, Jimmy Tapiz, Frank Sasaki, Undercloak421, Phoenix Black, and Brian Zen24.